Hey, it's Greg Nicotero. You are, or if you're not, should be watching Alpha Romero on YouTube.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about Romero, Argento, some Spasmo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a odd. You've seen that one, right? Spasmo?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I actually just watched it not too long ago for the first time, and I watched it again here recently because I've just been trying to find, if there are any shots or anything that you can kind of point at and try to figure out. Yeah, there you go. If you can kind of see, like, oh, this is obviously something Romero shot, but I still have no recollection of this. We were talking about this before we came online.
This is a pretty underrated Lenzi giallo, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, it's not bad. It's definitely it doesn't play quite like your normal giallo. I don't think. Like, there's not, which kind of goes to what what Romero was hired to do. But there's not really a guy in black gloves, and there's not the mystery to it. Really, it's more of like a what the fuck is going on type of thing until you get to the end, and you're like, oh, it's more of a trippy kind of thing.
It is psychedelic, trippy.
Yeah,
shit.
yeah.
Like, I could say it'd be a good double bill with Hatchet for the Honeymoon.
Yeah, that would be
Mario Bava
yeah.
film.
But so 1974 is when that came out, I believe. I'm trying to find. So as you guys know, I'm currently reading George A. Romero's Independent Cinema by Tom Fallows, and he writes a little bit in it. And this has got the quote in it. I'm going to read out of the book, kind of explain. So the big question has always been, like, so Romero was hired to do some insert shots for the U.S. release of Spasmo.
Mm-hmm.
Do
Right.
those shots exist? Does that version still exist out there? I don't know. I've never seen it. I don't know what it is to really critique, but so in the book here reads, Laurel, who was the company Romero and Rubinstein were part of at the time. Laurel consequently, I can't say that. Consequently purchased the U.S. rights to several European co-productions, including 10 Little Indians, Le Secret, and Where's the Smoke. As with the television product, films were sold to limited partnerships established and overseen as tax shelters by Laurel itself, and then sold again to more experienced distributors. On the sale of the Italian giallo film Spasmo, Umberto Lenzi, 1974, distributor buyer Libra Films rehired Laurel to shoot graphic inserts for the U.S. release. The giallo subgenre was made famous by Mario Bava in such films as Blood and Black Lace and Dario Argento with The Bird with Crystal Plumage. Can't read. It's kind of dark. Let me turn on the light. That'll help. And the violence in these films was often explicit, sexualized, and operatic. Lenzi, however, designed his film as a conscious break from such paradigms. Under Romero's direction, additional footage was shot in Laurel's first-floor studio space, these new scenes depicting a killer in a leather fetish mask committing brutal acts of murder. This masked killer, admittedly part of the giallo iconography, served to disguise the fact that here he was played by a Laurel crew member and not one of the original Italian cast. Such altercations, though common in foreign film acquisitions, rest uneasily along Romero's auteurist proclamations. His initial incentive behind Laurel was to obtain control of material and to safeguard productions against interference. To sustain this space, Romero appeared willing to sacrifice the authorial voice of other filmmakers. Lenzi was incensed when he heard about these changes, disdainful of this process and recutting international releases without directorial approval. He regarded Romero's actions as reprehensible. He should have refused, or at least he should have notified me. I would never do such a thing. I have my ethical code as a director. Apparently George does not. That is a quote from Umberto Lenzi.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So Romero later conceded that working on Spasmo was his most embarrassing moment, yet could at least console himself that these schemes kept him working as a media producer. This said, Rubinstein's business expertise continued to dictate corporate movements, and in 1976, blah, blah, blah. So that's basically the whole write-up there on that. So basically Romero was hired to add some insert shots to this to the U.S. release of this version.
For more gore.
Yeah,
type shit.
to make it more palatable to I guess a U.S. audience.
Mm-hmm.
But this version, I've never gotten a straight answer on what was shot. I mean, in that book, I mean, he says, you know, there's a guy in a leather mask and the leather gloves, and he's going around killing and all that, just to add some more of that, the typical giallo flavor to the movie. I
have something like Troy Howarth wrote on this a little bit.
Okay.
About Romero. He said, if you want me to read it,
sure.
It's not too long. As a bizarre footnote to an already bizarre film, it's worth noting that when Spasmo eventually made its way to the U.S. in the summer of '76, another major filmmaker was drafted to add some new sequences. George A. Romero, then in the midst of filming Martin, shot in '76, but unreleased in America until '78, and his associate, Tony Bubba, were tasked with shooting some sequences involving mannequins. Yes, even more mannequins, which were apparently intended to add some extra zest to the murder sequences. It's difficult to ascertain what this added footage was definitely comprised of, as the present author has had no luck finding anybody who can remember seeing the U.S. theatrical version. The edition available on Blu-ray and DVD is the original Italian edit, dubbed into English. It's unclear whether the material was shot and then discarded by the distributor, Libra Films International, or whether the material has simply disappeared over time due to the reemergence of the original Italian edit. Regardless, if the version with Romero's footage ever did play in theaters, it has since receded completely from view.
Right. I think he did do the full like 10 minutes, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
About 10 minutes.
From what I can gather, it did play in the US in theaters, but obviously I don't know what went on with the footage after that. It's just been a complete mystery. I'd love to see that, actually, because if it makes it more of like a Black Glove Killer type thing.
But you got two film buffs right there that haven't seen it.
Yeah,
And, I think
it
probably doesn't
now.
exist, I would imagine, unless somebody just got it stashed away somewhere and it's fucking rotting.
I mean, that's happened in the past. Yeah.
I mean, there's a chance it could turn up somewhere, but I mean,
right.
You would think that it's got to exist somewhere. You know, it's like, I don't know. Like I said, I've just from that account,
for sure.
Just from that account, and then I actually talked to Tony Booba about it, Living Dead Week, and I asked him about it. I was like, "So do you remember anything about what you guys shot for Spasmo or anything?" And he was just kind of like, "No, not really. I just remember we had a bunch of mannequins, and we were just kind of doing this." And it didn't sound like he made it sound like they didn't do much of anything. Okay. And he actually kind of said, like, I think it was for the trailer or something, the U.S. trailer, like it was just some stuff for the trailer. But I've gone and looked at the trailer. The U.S. trailer for Spasmo, and I don't see anything that's not in the film itself. So I don't know. It's kind of one of those great mysteries. It's like, what was shot?
Yeah.
You know, where is it? Like, is there a version out there with it? I've never seen a version with it. I've only seen the Italian version with the English dub.
Right.
So there is footage in the film though of a mannequin in there. I think, isn't it hanging in a forest or something? I'm sure I've seen that in the background.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's what I thought. Like maybe.
So whether that was Romero's, I don't know, and just a little bit made it through.
Well, my thought, like when I first saw the movie, was at the very end scene with them, and he goes into the room and he's got all the mannequins set up and stuff. And there's a lot of close-up shots of mannequins. I was like, well, maybe that was added for some whatever reason. You know, maybe that was added. Maybe some of those shots. But then you look and you can kind of match up all the mannequins in the wider shots with the actual actor, and that wasn't the case. So it's like, okay, I guess that's not it. So
that scene gives me like tourist trap vibes. You know in a way.
Yeah.
It's a very weird way to end that movie with him just stabbing that mannequin, and then you're just like, okay, this is kind of uncomfortable, but it's kind of cool.
An odd role for Ivan Razumov. He's usually the crazy one, you know.
Yeah. So I mean, that was kind of Romero's first interaction with European cinema, if you want to call it that. And of course, Umberto Lenzi, his quote about, Romero's actions reprehensible. And of course, Lenzi would go on and do Nightmare City a few years after that. And it was, in his, the way he kind of puts it, it's his response to Romero's version of the films, where he wanted to make a more realistic version of what Romero was doing, which, it's debatable, but I love
it's funny though.
I love Nightmare City.
Oh yeah.
You gotta love Nightmare City.
Yeah,
That's one of my all-time favorites. But I've always heard, like, there's always been like a tinge of, I feel like maybe Lenzi kind of held that against Romero, but at the same time, it's like that version doesn't even exist really anymore. So it's like, yeah, who gives a shit? Like,
and then Lenzi's like, it's not a zombie film.
Yeah.
From what I was reading up on it, and it was more, Lenzi was more pissed off with the actual production company or the studio rather than Romero himself.
Okay,
none of them ever crossed paths. I don't think they ever met in real life.
I don't think they've ever met.
Put Romero over though, in some interviews. Yeah, like I've never really heard him outright say anything negative about Romero.
No, he blamed the studio. I'm pretty sure. I don't.
He shit on plenty of other people.
Yeah.
Actors, and Argento was his pupil and all this shit, and
yeah, I've heard that too. Like Argento was his underling or whatnot, but
yeah. He owes me everything, kind of shit,
Yeah. But I always thought that was kind of an interesting little mystery story there to the movie and I always wondered, because I think, if I remember correctly, the trailer for Spasmo is like a hidden Easter egg on the Blue Underground release of The Crazies. And I remember seeing that years and years and years ago before I even knew what that movie was. But I was so intrigued by that trailer just because of the constant Spasmo.
Yeah.
Spasmo. And I was just like, what is this fucking weird ass movie? And I never understood what the connection was, like why that was an Easter egg. But then years later I find out, like, oh, George shot stuff with it, but nobody ever really knew what the hell he shot for it. So maybe someday we'll figure it out and we'll see it. But